The Seattle Kraken entered this offseason with one singular goal, and that goal is not to be good, it's to be interesting. For their entire existence, the Kraken have basically been the forgotten stepchild of the NHL, while their fellow expansion brethren, the Vegas Golden Knights, are dominating and forming enemies everywhere they go. And while other young and up-and-coming teams like the Utah Mammoth are inspiring, the Seattle Kraken just seem to be stuck in a quagmire. Apart from that surprise 2-round playoff run in their second year, the Kraken have just generally not been a relevant organization, but never so bad that they're at risk of winning the draft lottery and getting one of the best players in the draft. So today we're going to fix the Seattle Kraken, and if not make them better, at least make them interesting. And we're going to start, as always, with the people up top. Between Botterill and Lane Lambert, I'm really not holding my breath that this is going to be a new and exciting direction for the Seattle Kraken, as much as it's going to be just maintaining the exact same strategy that hasn't worked for years. Awesome, but let's go ahead and go through the exercise anyway and take a look at the Kraken roster at the end of last year. As you can see, they stupidly added at the deadline last year, acquiring Bobby McMann from the Toronto Maple Leafs, although he was just kind of out there for free. The team has also historically not been too afraid to spend in free agency, bringing in guys like Brandon Montour and Chandler Stevenson. The problem is that those contracts just haven't looked like they are money well spent. The Kraken did, however, end up with a lot of key players on the injury report, including Jared McCann, their leading scorer, Jaden Schwartz, and Jamie Oleksiak, and both goaltenders actually in Philip Grubauer and Joey Daccord. And while I did have hope for Daccord after a pretty strong 24-25 season, he did take a major step back last year, so the goaltending situation is a little bit shakier than I would like. Now, as far as prospects go, the Seattle Kraken do have a couple of good ones. Berkeley Catton's their best prospect. He got a lot of time with the big club last year, and I'm excited to see how he can develop. And their first-round pick from last year, Jake O'Brien, is also looking pretty good, but we'll have to see if he actually makes the jump to the NHL next year. They've also got some other miscellaneous, maybe could be good prospects like Furcus, Fisker Molgard, Ty Nelson, Yanni Nyman, who actually was with the big club last year and probably could stick again this year, and Edward Sale, their first-round pick from a few years ago, who has turned out to be a pretty massive disappointment. In terms of what assets the Kraken have to work with, they do have 2 first-round picks, number 6 overall and number 25 overall, which they received from Tampa Bay. They also have 2 firsts and 2 seconds next year and their own second-rounder this year. And as far as cap space goes, they've got about $28 million to play with, although there are still a few players that they have on the roster who are going to need pretty significant extensions. McMahon is probably the biggest one. I think that they would want to keep around because they're in desperate need of scoring help. But Jamie Oleksiak, Jaden Schwartz, and Eeli Tolvanen could all also be demanding an extension. I don't know that any of those are necessarily a need, but I would probably keep at least Oleksiak and maybe one of Schwartz and Tolvanen around, and I'd probably lead Tolvanen. But as far as where all of that talent slots in next year, it looks pretty bad up front. Jared McCann's really the only guy who I would consider a legitimate top sixer on a Stanley Cup contending team. Matty Beniers and Shane Wright have both been just massive disappointments in terms of their development. Chandler Stevenson, when he was brought in, just has not lived up to that contract and is just not a top 6 center. So you got 3 guys who are all basically number 3 Cs, and then Freddie Gaudreau is a perfectly fine 4th liner. Bobby McMann is a good player, but I would say on a Stanley Cup contending team, he's more of a 3rd liner. Kaapo Kakko, again, just not productive enough to be a top 6er. And Jordan Eberle is unfortunately on the wrong side of the aging curve to still be a top 6er. Defensively, though, looks pretty good. Vince Dunn is one of the more underrated number 1 defensemen in the entire league. Adam Larson, even though he's getting up there in age, is still capable, though I wouldn't say he's the best number 2 defenseman. And Brandon Montour, who they signed a couple years ago, is a very good top 4 defenseman, although I think he does a lot better in a situation like Florida, where he doesn't have to eat a ton of minutes and can take more chances offensively. In goal, I still believe in Joey Daccord, and after Philip Grubauer's kind of surprising resurrection last year, that's a pretty solid goaltending tandem, so I don't think they need to make any big moves there. The real key to this offseason is going to be whether guys like Berkeley Catton can develop, whether Jake O'Brien can step in, but even if they do, that's still like at least 2 top 6 forwards that you need desperately if you're the Seattle Kraken. So what should they do? Well, as I mentioned, they have a lot of draft capital that they can play around with, and they have a bunch of pretty good defensemen in a league where defense is at a premium. So I would actually advise them to take a tactic similar to what I suggested for the New York Rangers, which is take that number 6 overall pick, take Vince Dunn, your number 1 defenseman, and see if you can make a trade with either San Jose or Toronto, probably more likely San Jose. Now, unlike in the New York Rangers trade, I don't think Vince Dunn has nearly the same level of value as Adam Fox. He's very good, but he's not an elite top 10 number 1 defenseman. So I don't think you can do the full pick swap where you're getting back to first round picks in exchange for trading up and moving an asset. I think it's more likely you're doing the straight pick swap from 6 to 2 and throwing in Vince Dunn to equalize the value, which is basically asking the San Jose Sharks if they would trade that number 20 pick for Vince Dunn straight up, because that's about the equivalent value in terms of picks. So I think that that's actually enough to get it done, is just number 6 plus Vince Dunn for the number 2 overall pick. The Sharks get their number 1 defenseman, and they still keep a top 10 pick, while Seattle moves into the top 2, and they have another first round pick to play with as well. And the reason you're doing this is to make a move to get up into the top 2, where you can take a guy like Ivar Stenberg, who is one of the best prospects we've seen in a good long while. If you look at the analytics and how he projects out, he's the 22nd best forward prospect since 2008. That's ahead of guys like Matvei Michkov and Matthew Tkachuk, and comparable to guys like Quentin Byfield and Andrei Svechnikov. He had a massive improvement this year, and it's incredibly likely that he's at the very least going to be a top 6 forward, which you desperately need. And given that right now the Kraken are picking 6, which means that they are taking probably one of the second-tier defensemen or forwards, I think it's worth giving up on a guy who's in his prime but really isn't going to be helping you while you rebuild this team, to get a guy who's going to be a foundational building block, hopefully. And at the very least, getting the second best prospect in the draft, or God willing the best if somehow Toronto passes up on Gavin McKenna, would make the Seattle Kraken an interesting team. And with all that cap space that's left, you could go on out there and try and get an Alex Tuck, or you could look into offer sheeting Jason Robertson or Zach Benson, and those are both really good players and they'd be worth it to add to your team. But I don't think either of those fundamentally changes the outlook for the Seattle Kraken. Those are both very, very good complementary pieces, but they need a lot of talent around them. The Seattle Kraken need a foundational building block. They need a hopeful superstar. And in this draft and in this free agency class, there are really only 2 available, McKenna and Stenberg. And if I'm the Seattle Kraken, I'm just doing whatever you could possibly do to move up and get one of those 2 guys. As far as the rest, I think you're in sell mode. You could trade away guys like Benier and Wright, who have been disappointments. You could unload a contract like Brandon Montour and Adam Larson if you wanted to. The Kraken just need to tear it all down and build it back up around a defining player. While they were hopeful that Beniers and Wright could be those guys, it hasn't worked out at this point. So I think it's time to strip it down for the Kraken and start building up something better.